Keep your dirty blue-collar job hidden tonight. Do you understand me? Annie, my biological sister, hissed the words through her teeth. Her manicured acrylic nails dug into the flesh of my arm until I felt the hot sting of broken skin. A perfectly rehearsed smile stayed frozen on her lips, a mask for the Charleston high society guests drifting through the ballroom. But her eyes pure venom. Mason is an elite Navy SEAL officer. He despises cheap trash. Look at your rough hands. Look at that cheap dress. Do not humiliate me. My mother stood right next to her. She heard every single syllable. What did she do? She turned her back and casually smoothed out an invisible crease on the silk tablecloth. No one in this toxic bloodline cared that my jaw muscles were currently locked tight enough to crack molars. Then Mason walked over. The arrogant special warfare operator let his gaze sweep across the dim corner of the room. His eyes hit my face. His boots stopped dead. Every muscle in his arrogant frame locked up. The expensive crystal champagne flute slipped from his fingers. It went into a dead freefall, shattering into 100 glittering pieces on the marble floor. But before I tell you exactly why that proud, untouchable man started shaking in front of me, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Because the absolute hell my family paid that night is a debt no one in this room could ever calculate. 18 hours before that crystal shattered, there was no silk tablecloth. There was only the freezing steel deck of a Coast Guard cutter. Lake Michigan. 0300 hours. The wind came off the water like a physical fist. It slapped microscopic shards of ice directly into my face. I stood braced against the railing. My legs automatically absorbed the violent pitch and roll of the vessel. I bit the inside of my lip. The taste of copper and salt filled my mouth. I pulled off my soaked neoprene glove. The dead air instantly bit into the deep rope scars crossing the back of my hand. I grabbed my tactical ballpoint pen. The ink was frozen solid. I rubbed the plastic barrel violently against the rough fabric of my Kevlar plate carrier until the friction generated enough heat. I pressed the pen to the waterproof logbook. Red ink. A hard check mark. 27. 27 commercial fishermen dragged out of the sub-zero black water, under my command. Down by my combat boots, a junior rescue swimmer sat slumped against the wet steel bulkhead. He was completely drained. His eyes were shut. His knuckles were bone white. His hand gripped the bottom hem of my uniform pants. He held on to me like I was a human blast shield. A heavy sacred silence smothered the ship. The raw silence of people who just beat death in a street fight. Then the vibration started. My satellite phone buzzed aggressively against my ribs right inside my chest pocket. It was not a call from Sector Command. I pulled it out. The cracked screen cut through the dark. 3 rapid-fire text messages. The sender was my mother. There was no, "Are you safe?" There was no, "I saw the storm on the news." Just cold tactical orders from a woman who only cared about optics. Make sure you land in Charleston on time. Do not wear your ugly military boots. Buy heels. Do not talk about working in the dirt at the port. Mason's family is old money. You will not ruin Annie's image. I stood there on a deck coated in freezing sea spray and actual blood. And staring back at me from the glowing screen was pure, unadulterated disgust from the woman who gave birth to me. I did not type a reply. I never do. My calloused thumb swiped the glass. I opened my banking application. A new notification sat at the top of the screen. An automatic withdrawal. $2,000 flat. It was the scheduled payment for Annie's credit card. The card I co-signed. The card she maxed out last month buying a designer leather handbag to impress her new Navy SEAL boyfriend. She was the parasite. She lived wrapped in silk, financed entirely by the hazard pay I earned, hanging off a steel winch cable in hurricane-force winds. I bled to pay her bills, and in return I was the cheap trash that had to be hidden away in the corner of a ballroom. I pressed the power button on the phone. The screen went black. The muscles in my jaw tightened until a sharp pain shot up to my temples. I closed my eyes against the stinging wind. Tactical breathing. Inhale for 4 seconds. Hold for 4 seconds. Exhale for 4 seconds. Lock the emotion in a steel box. Bury the box. Dawn broke pale and ugly by the time I returned to my cramped quarters at the base. I sat on the edge of the narrow metal cot. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small, worn leather notebook. My thumb traced the indented letters on the cover. Psalm 93:4. Mightier than the waves of the sea, my only anchor in a family determined to drown me. I dragged my black tactical deployment duffel out from under the bed. I did not pack floral dresses. I did not pack pearls. I stripped off my heavy uniform. The fabric was heavy with engine oil and the stench of the lake. I kicked it into the laundry bin. I reached into my locker and grabbed the plain, cheap gray dress my mother insisted I wear to blend into the background. I threw it into the empty black bag. I grabbed the heavy metal zipper. I pulled it shut. Zzz-rip. The sharp metallic sound echoed off the cinder block walls of the empty room. This was not a civilian flight to a family dinner. This was a deployment. And I was marching straight behind enemy lines. The sharp, metallic noise of the zipper from my dark quarters echoed in my head hours later. I stood at the airport security checkpoint. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a dull, sickening hum. I unzipped the front pocket of my black tactical duffel bag to retrieve my military identification card. My rough thumb snagged on a folded piece of paper jammed deep in the bottom seam. It was stiff, yellowed at the edges. I pulled it out and unfolded it against the cold metal of the inspection bin. A bank transfer receipt, 5 years old, $5,000. I stared at the faded black numbers. That was my hazard pay. Blood money. I earned every single cent of that specific paycheck dangling from a steel winch cable over 20-foot swells in the Bering Sea. I spent 18 hours pulling freezing bodies out of a winter storm while helicopter fuel burned my throat. I came back to base with mild hypothermia and a fractured rib. My mother demanded that money the second my boots hit dry land. Her text message was printed on the back of the receipt in faded ink. It is the duty of the older sister to provide for the family. Provide for what? A lavish catered 21st birthday party for Annie at an exclusive country club. $5,000 for a single night of cheap champagne, imported flowers, and fake friends. She spent my blood on a cake. I crushed the receipt into a tight, hard ball in my fist. I threw it into the metal trash can next to the conveyor belt. It hit the bottom with a hollow thud. I grabbed my heavy bag and walked away without looking back. I sat in a hard plastic chair at the departure gate. The terminal was loud-packed with civilians complaining about delayed flights and overpriced coffee. I blocked out the noise. I unlocked my phone and opened a secured photo folder. I bypassed operational maps and stopped at one specific picture. Naval Officer Commissioning Ceremony. I stood dead center in the frame on the wide parade deck. Dress whites, polished brass buttons catching the summer sun. Medals pinned perfectly to my chest. The background was a sea of my classmates. They were crying. They were locked in tight, desperate embraces with their proud fathers and weeping mothers. You could practically hear the applause through the screen. Look closer at my picture. The space to my left was completely empty. The space to my right was completely empty. My mother and Annie did not show up. They did not answer my calls. They were on a first-class flight to Paris that exact morning. Annie needed bespoke designer gowns for the final round of a minor, meaningless regional beauty pageant. My mother maxed out another high-interest credit card to make sure her golden child sparkled on a wooden stage. My existence, my blood, my oath to the country. It was entirely erased from the family history. I locked the phone screen. My face remained a mask of stone. The airplane tires shrieked violently against the asphalt. Welcome to Charleston. The second that the cabin doors opened, a wall of suffocating humid heat punched me in the chest. It smelled like melting asphalt and the heavy, sickeningly sweet perfume of the wealthy passengers pushing past me in the aisle. I dragged my black bag straight into the nearest airport restroom. I locked the metal stall door. I pulled my olive drab military shirt over my head. I folded it into a perfect tight square. I pushed it deep into the bottom of the bag. I was stripping away my armor. Then I pulled out the dress. It was a pale, shapeless gray thing. Cheap fabric, flimsy, uneven stitching. Exactly what my mother ordered me to wear. The uniform of a low-class dock worker. A nobody. I pulled it over my head. The cheap polyester scratched fiercely against the thick scar tissue on my collarbone. The dress fit poorly over my muscular shoulders, making me look awkward, defeated. I pulled my hair back and tied it into a severe tight knot at the base of my neck. I unbuckled my heavy tactical watch. The thick black resin felt like a shield. I dropped it into my bag. I looked in the scratched mirror over the sink. The disguise was complete. I looked entirely harmless. I looked pathetic. I walked out through the sliding glass doors of the terminal. The hot air clung to my skin like a wet blanket. The hard rubber wheels of my tactical bag ground heavily against the pavement as I approached the taxi stand. My phone lit up in my hand. A location ping from Annie, followed immediately by a text message. Use the side entrance of the hotel. Do not drag that massive ugly bag through the main lobby. Mason is drinking with his friends at the bar. They are elite. You will make me look trashy. I stopped dead on the concrete sidewalk. I stared at the glowing letters on the screen. The corner of my mouth twitched upward. It formed a cold, mechanical smirk, a silent laugh that did not reach my eyes. I did not type a reply. My calloused fingers gripped the heavy nylon handle of the bag. My knuckles turned white under the strain. I adjusted my posture, shoulders pulled back, spine straight as a steel rod. I took a long, measured step forward. I did not head for the dark service alleyway. I did not look for a back door meant for the kitchen staff. I set my bearings straight for the massive, brightly lit main entrance of the five-star luxury resort. The crystal chandeliers glared through the towering glass double doors, illuminating the wealthy elite mingling inside. Officers do not use the back door. I pushed open the heavy mahogany door of the luxury hotel room. The air conditioning blasted against my face, smelling of expensive chemical lavender. I dropped my heavy black duffel bag at the foot of the king-sized bed. Before the bag even settled on the thick carpet, a sound cut through the quiet room. A sharp, continuous electronic noise. Beep. It came from my tactical backpack. I unbuckled the heavy nylon flap. My encrypted military laptop sat in the dark compartment. A single LED light in the corner of the chassis was flashing. Bright, angry red. A Priority 1 secure channel alert. A code, red summons from the Judge Advocate General. JAG, the Navy Military Police. My heart kicked once against my ribs. I pulled the heavy machine out and flipped the screen open. The blue light washed over the dark hotel room. I typed my security clearance credentials. The legal document loaded instantly. The subject line in bold black letters punched me straight in the eyes. Internal Escalating Investigation. Great Lakes Search and Rescue Operation. Defendant Lieutenant Commander Alice Jones. The walls of the massive, expensive hotel room suddenly rushed inward. The air grew thin. I placed my rough hands on the edge of the desk. I did not blink. I dragged the optical mouse down, scrolling past the bureaucratic jargon, cutting straight to the sworn statement. The accuser. A junior lieutenant on my crew. A soft, arrogant kid fresh out of the academy dropped into my rescue unit for one reason. His father was a sitting United States senator. I remembered that kid from 18 hours ago. When the 30-foot waves crashed over the bow, he froze. He lost his mind in the dark. He screamed into the radio. He was a coward wrapped in a uniform he did not earn. Now he was trying to ruin me. His official report stated that I panicked. He wrote that I ordered a suicidal navigation vector that nearly killed the entire crew. He twisted the facts, manipulated the timelines, and shifted the blame entirely onto my shoulders. He needed to wash his service record clean before his father pushed him up the chain of command. He needed a scapegoat. They wanted to strip my rank. They wanted to take the only thing in this world I built with my own two hands. I stared at the glowing screen. A cold, heavy realization settled into my bones. That lying lieutenant was exactly like Annie. They were the exact same breed of parasite. Weaponized incompetence. People who use their last names, their connections, and their fake tears to crush the people doing the actual heavy lifting. At home, I was the blue-collar trash meant to finance a designer lifestyle. At the base, I was the disposable shield meant to take a bullet for a politician's son. Nowhere was safe. The betrayal was absolute. I did not reach for my phone to call a defense attorney. I did not cry. Crying is a civilian luxury. I reached into the hidden zipper pocket of my boots. I pulled out a solid steel reinforced tactical thumb drive. I jammed the metal drive into the side of the computer. The screen prompted a level 4 alphanumeric passcode. I hammered the keys. I accessed the secure server. I did not write a statement of defense. I downloaded the raw, unedited satellite telemetry from the storm. I pulled the geographic radar tracks. And finally, I downloaded the primary cockpit voice radio recordings from that exact hour on the water. The progress bar inched across the screen. The computer fan whirred. The dry clicking sound of data transferring filled the silent room. 100% complete. I ripped the thumb drive out of the port. I grabbed a steel dog tag chain from my bag, threaded the drive onto the metal beads, and dropped it down the front of my shirt. The heavy steel block hit my bare skin. It was freezing cold against my chest. The silver bullet was in the chamber. My civilian phone buzzed on the bed. A new text message illuminated the screen. My mother. Get down to the lobby right now. The party is starting. Find a dark corner to stand in. Do not open your mouth and do not speak to anyone. I locked the phone. I stood up and walked over to the full-length mirror mounted on the closet door. I looked at my reflection, the cheap, shapeless gray dress, hair pulled back so tight it hurt my scalp, no makeup, the rough, calloused hands of a dock worker hanging at my sides. I looked exactly like the pathetic, harmless failure my family desperately needed me to be. I raised my left hand. I tapped 2 fingers against my chest, right over my heart. The hard, sharp edge of the steel thumb drive pressed back against my ribs. My family was waiting downstairs to humiliate me for their own amusement. The military lawyers were waiting on paper to execute my career to protect a coward. Both fronts were collapsing at the exact same time. I turned away from the mirror. I walked to the heavy mahogany door. I gripped the brass handle. I did not hesitate. I pushed the door wide open and stepped out into the hallway. The long walk to the ballroom began. The timeline was now locked. In 5 minutes, I would be standing in a dim corner. In 5 minutes, Annie would dig her acrylic nails into my arm. In 5 minutes, a Navy SEAL would drop his champagne glass on the marble floor. The war on 2 fronts had officially started. I pushed through the massive oak double doors of the Ashley River mansion. The central air conditioning blasted my face. Cold, over-filtered, it smelled like wealth. My resting heart rate held steady at 60 beats per minute. My eyes swept the room on pure instinct. 2 primary exits at the front and rear. 1 secondary staircase leading to a wooden mezzanine. 32 targets holding crystal wine glasses and expensive appetizers. The scent hit me in a suffocating wave. Aged cigars and heavy sweet designer perfume. It coated the back of my throat. It was thick and nauseating. I would take the sharp, burning smell of marine diesel fuel and engine grease over this room any day of the week. My mother spotted me instantly. She did not smile. Her face tightened into a mask of pure irritation. She marched across the imported Persian rugs, her heels clicking aggressively against the hardwood floor. She grabbed my arm. Her manicured nails dug into my bicep. She yanked me toward a cluster of relatives gathered around a mahogany wet bar. "Here is Alice," she announced to the group. Her voice was loud. She pitched it up artificially to make sure everyone in our immediate circle heard her. "She does odd jobs down at the commercial docks. Loading cargo, sweeping, that sort of thing. She looks a little rough around the edges, but she pays her own rent." She cut me off before I could even open my mouth. She stripped away my identity to protect her own lie. Aunt Helen leaned against the polished bar. She held a glass of dark Cabernet in her heavily jeweled hand. She looked me up and down. Her eyes stopped on the cheap gray fabric of my dress, then crawled up to my face. She sneered. "The docks?" Helen asked. "Manual labor." "It certainly shows, Alice. Women who spend their days in the sun and salt water ruin their skin. You look exhausted. And old." Helen took a slow sip of her wine, keeping her eyes locked on mine. "You really should take notes from your younger sister. Annie spends hours on her skincare routine. She invests in herself. That is exactly why she secured a Navy SEAL, a real military officer." The group of relatives erupted into laughter, high, sharp, mocking sounds. The noise blended with the soft acoustic guitar playing in the background. They were tearing pieces of my flesh off to entertain themselves before dinner. I was the designated joke. I did not defend myself. I did not raise my voice. I did not give them the satisfaction of a reaction. I shifted my weight evenly onto both heels. I placed my hands behind my back, my right hand resting perfectly in the palm of my left. Parade rest. The standard military position of attention. My jaw muscles locked together. I stared straight through Aunt Helen's forehead. "I coordinate operations on the water," I said. My voice was flat, emotionless, a dead tone. It was a completely true statement, but vague enough to keep the sheep blind to the wolf standing in their pasture. Suddenly, the threat warning system in the back of my brain flared to life. 3 yards to my left. A man stood completely still near a large stone pillar. He was older. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit. He was not laughing with the rest of the family. He held a heavy glass of scotch, but he was not drinking it. His eyes were the color of cold steel. He was currently running a tactical threat assessment of his own. His gaze tracked my posture. He saw the locked spine. He noticed the exact calculated positioning of my feet. Then his eyes dropped and locked onto the thick, jagged rope scar running across the back of my right hand. The same skin Aunt Helen claimed was ruined by manual labor. The older man understood exactly what kind of steel cable cut into bone like that. His thick eyebrows pulled together, a micro-expression of recognition. He gave me a single invisible nod, just a millimeter of movement from his chin. Admiral Vance, former deputy commander of the fleet at the Pentagon. I recognized his face from the intelligence briefings. He was a predator hiding among herbivores. Amidst a sea of fake smiles and cheap insults, a general had just smelled the gunpowder on me. The heavy wooden front doors swung open again. The energy in the room violently shifted. The acoustic guitar music seemed to fade. Mason had arrived. He walked into the mansion like he owned the entire state of South Carolina. He was young, cocky. He possessed the arrogant stride of a golden boy who was born on third base and genuinely believed he hit a triple. He looked exactly like a man who had never faced a real consequence in his life. Annie shrieked with joy. She ran across the room, her high heels clicking frantically. She locked her arms around his bicep like a trophy wife. She dragged him straight toward my dark corner of the room. She wanted blood. She wanted the ultimate comparison. Mason stopped in front of me. He looked at my gray dress like it was a stain on the floor. He extended his hand. I gripped it. The contact lasted less than 1 second. His palm was shockingly soft. It lacked the heavy calluses of a man who worked the ropes. It was the hand of an officer who spent more time posing for promotional pictures than pulling broken men out of freezing water. Mason yanked his hand back immediately. He subtly wiped his palm against the side of his expensive dress slacks, as if poverty was a highly contagious disease. He did not introduce himself. He did not ask my name. He gave me a rigid, dismissive nod. He turned his back to me completely and walked straight toward the center of the room. He grabbed a fresh glass of champagne and stepped into a circle of wealthy businessmen. The referee had stepped into the ring. The bell had rung. Mason cleared his throat, raising his glass to the crowd. He was ready to hold court. He was ready to dig his own grave. Clink, clink, clink. Mason tapped a heavy silver spoon against the rim of his crystal champagne flute. The sharp, obnoxious sound sliced right through the low, wealthy hum of conversation in the ballroom. He stood dead center on the imported Persian rug. He wanted the spotlight, and the sheep in the room were desperately eager to give it to him. The room fell completely silent. Dozens of eyes turned toward the elite Navy SEAL. He did not raise his expensive glass to Annie. He did not offer a polite rehearsed toast to love family or their upcoming wedding. He chose to talk about blood. He chose to build a pedestal for his own ego using the trauma of strangers. Mason puffed out his chest inside his dark, tailored jacket. He started breaking down a massive search and rescue operation that took place less than 18 hours ago. The Lake Michigan storm. The exact operation he read about in a classified morning briefing at his desk. He threw around military acronyms, SAR, zero visibility. Rogue swells, atmospheric pressure drops, like cheap confetti. He was intentionally blinding the civilian businessmen in the room. They drank it in. They nodded in absolute awe, totally captivated by a man analyzing a violent battlefield he had never actually seen with his own two eyes. Annie stood right next to him. She hooked her thin arm through his, flashing a brilliant, arrogant smile at the crowd. She looked exactly like a woman holding a gold trophy she did not earn. "It was a Category 12 hurricane cell," Mason said. His voice was loud, practiced, and dripping with condescension. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his champagne. He smirked. "The Coast Guard SAR unit out there completely lost their bearing. Absolute chaos on the comms. Honestly, if I was the commander on that deck, I would have stuck to the textbook. Standard operating procedure." He paused for dramatic effect. The wealthy real estate developers and bankers leaned in, hanging on his every word. They were supposed to shift the cutter to a 315 navigation vector. That is the only logical way to bypass the massive submerged ice sheets building up in that sector. Instead, the commander broke protocol. They panicked. They banked the ship the opposite way. It proves they were green, soft, complete amateurs buckling under pressure. The oxygen instantly left my lungs. A cold, heavy block of pure disgust dropped directly into the bottom of my stomach. Mason was regurgitating the corrupt JAG report. He was reading the exact lies fabricated by that coward lieutenant to cover his own miserable failure. Worse, Mason was using that garbage report to inflate his own public image. He was taking the brutal, freezing reality of 27 rescued lives and turning it into a cheap punchline to prove how much of a tactical genius he was to a room full of civilians. My left hand formed a fist. My fingers dug so hard into the cheap gray fabric of my dress that the poor stitching actually groaned under the pressure. 315. That was the vector the screaming, panicked lieutenant demanded we take in the pitch-black storm. That specific coordinate, the memory hit me like a physical blow. The freezing spray blinding my eyes, the deafening roar of the helicopter blades, the lieutenant grabbing my arm, his face pale with terror, screaming that we had to turn to 315 because the radar showed clear water. If I had listened to that coward, if I had banked that heavy steel cutter to a 315 vector, the ship would have slammed directly into a submerged geologic fault line hidden under the violent churning water. The jagged rock would have sheared the hull open in 3 seconds flat. The freezing water would have flooded the engine room. Every single man on my crew would be sitting dead at the bottom of Lake Michigan right now. Mason was not just a clown showing off at a party. He was spitting on the honor of my crew. He was actively mocking the men currently lying in hospital beds with fractured ribs, concussions, and severe hypothermia just to get a few pathetic claps from a room full of old money. A sharp, bony elbow dug violently into my ribs. My mother. She leaned in close. I could smell the stale, expensive red wine on her breath. It mixed with her heavy floral perfume. "Keep your head down," she hissed. Her voice was a low, ugly scrape against my ear meant only for me. "Do not stand there pouting like a child. Stop being so jealous of your sister's success." That was it. That was the absolute bottom of the barrel. She was entirely willing to let a fraud disrespect a highly classified life-and-death military operation just so her favorite daughter could look good by association. She preferred the comfortable lie over the ugly truth. She preferred the shiny parasite over the bleeding workhorse. The steel box inside my chest shattered. The tactical breathing stopped. The military discipline holding my temper in check evaporated. I did not argue with her. I did not turn my head to look at her face. I raised my left arm and shoved my mother's hand away. It was a hard, physical, unapologetic rejection. I did not care if it left a bruise on her wrist. The era of the quiet, obedient punching bag was officially dead. The girl who let her family wipe their feet on her was gone. The only thing left standing in this dark corner of the room was a commanding officer. I stepped out of the shadows. The heavy, thick rubber sole of my military boot struck the polished marble floor. Crack! The sound was sharp and violent enough to make 2 businessmen standing near the edge of the circle flinch. I did not yell. I did not throw a tantrum. I did not let a single ounce of emotion bleed into my voice. I projected my words straight from the diaphragm, using the exact flat, cold tone I used to cut through the deafening noise of a screaming helicopter engine. Vector 298. The words hit the silent, perfumed room like a physical shockwave. Not 315. Every single conversation in the massive ballroom died. Instantly. Dozens of heads snapped in my direction. The wealthy real estate developers, the bankers, my Aunt Helen. All of them stared at the woman in the cheap, shapeless gray dress who had just interrupted the golden boy. Mason froze. The crystal champagne flute in his right hand stopped dead, hovering suspended in midair. The arrogant, untouchable smirk wiped completely off his face in less than a second. It was replaced by something else. The sharp, hyper-focused defense mechanism of a predator that just realized someone had stepped into its cage. He shifted his weight slightly, squaring his shoulders toward me. "What the hell did you just say?" Mason asked. His voice dropped an entire octave. It was no longer the loud, booming tone he used to entertain the civilians. It was a low, heavy threat. Before I could answer, Annie lunged forward. The blood had completely drained from her heavily contoured face. She looked pale, sick. She threw herself between Mason and me like a desperate animal guarding its meal. She glared at me, her chest heaving, her eyes wide with absolute panic. "Are you insane?" Annie shrieked. Her voice cracked, piercing the heavy silence of the room. "Shut your mouth right now. You work on a filthy dock. What the hell do you know about naval navigation vectors? Do not disrespect him." My mother moved fast. She stepped out from the cluster of relatives. Her face was dark red with fury. She reached out, aiming her manicured claw directly for the inside of my bicep. She wanted to pinch the flesh, drag me backward, and force me out through the kitchen doors before I could do any more damage to the family brand. I did not let her touch me. I raised my left forearm and blocked her wrist. Hard. I shoved her hand down with enough blunt force to make her stumble backward. I did not look at her. I did not look at Annie. My eyes locked onto Mason. I stared dead into his pupils. I did not blink. I projected a silent, suffocating pressure straight at him. A heavy, invisible wall of pure hostility. The kind of look that makes people unconsciously take a step back. Both my mother and Annie froze on the perimeter, suddenly too afraid to cross the invisible line I just drew on the marble floor. A 315 vector port. I said, my voice cold and flat, cutting straight through the heavy perfume in the air. A 315 vector would have driven the entire cutter headfirst into a submerged geologic fault line. I took one slow, deliberate step forward. The heavy rubber sole of my boot squeaked slightly against the polished stone. A hard bank to Axis 298 was the only viable tactical command. The only way to bypass the submerged ice sheet, catch the trailing wave force, and keep the steel hull from shearing open. I tilted my head, watching the color slowly drain out of Mason's confident face. "Did you pull your brilliant analysis from the official brief? Or did you pull it from the garbage after-action report filed by a coward junior officer who is currently waiting for a court-martial?" It is a bitter irony. The people who are relentlessly abandoned, belittled, and scapegoated by their own families usually possess the highest pain tolerance in the room. We learn to absorb the hits. We learn to survive in the cold. If you have ever stood completely alone against the toxic manipulation of the people who were supposed to love you, hit that like button and comment, "I understand," because you are not fighting this war by yourself. Mason physically recoiled. He actually took a half step backward. The cocky, untouchable Navy SEAL persona evaporated into the conditioned air. His eyes narrowed into tight slits. He started scanning my face, my cheap gray dress, the heavy boots I refused to take off. His brain was working overtime, trying to calculate the massive discrepancy standing right in front of him. "How do you know those specific classified operational details?" Mason demanded. The volume of his voice had dropped significantly. There was a slight tremor of uncertainty in his throat. "Even as a special operator, I only got clearance to read that preliminary damage report at 0600 this morning. Nobody outside the chain of command knows about the fault line." He looked at my scarred hands. He looked at Annie. Then he looked back at me, grasping for any logical civilian explanation. "What do you do for them?" Mason asked, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. "Are you a civilian contractor? Do you do administrative typing for the logistics crew?" I locked my knees. I pulled my shoulders back. I straightened my spine until I was standing at maximum height. I lifted my chin. The pathetic invisible aura of the cheap gray dress ripped wide open. The hunched, submissive blue-collar worker my mother wanted the world to see ceased to exist. I let the heavy armor-plated presence of a military commander flood the space between us. "I do not type reports," I said. My voice echoed off the high ceiling. Every single syllable was a heavy steel nail driven directly into the young officer's skull. "I do not do administrative logistics." I took one final step forward, closing the distance until I was well inside his personal space. I looked up into his eyes, letting him see the exact same cold, dead stare I used to look at the freezing black water of Lake Michigan. I was there, in the middle of the storm. I held his gaze. "I am the incident commander. That navigation order was mine." A dead, suffocating silence dropped over the Ashley River mansion. The bomb had just been dropped directly onto the center of the Persian rug. 3 seconds of absolute suffocating silence. Mason stood completely paralyzed in the center of the Persian rug. The pupils of his eyes dilated, absorbing the shock. His highly trained special operations brain was desperately trying to process the massive system failure happening right in front of his face. He was rapidly cross-referencing the classified data he read just 12 hours ago at Coronado Base with the woman standing 3 feet away. He looked at my cheap gray dress. Then his eyes locked onto my posture, the locked spine, the perfect immovable balance of a seasoned sailor. He looked at my hands again, really looked at them. He saw the heavy, jagged white tissue of winch cable scars. Scars you do not get from pushing paper at a logistics desk. The heavy, suffocating truth was radiating off me like heat off an engine block. It was actively crushing the ridiculous, pathetic lies Annie had fed him for the last 6 months. Suddenly, the silence shattered. "She is delusional," my mother shrieked. Her voice was high, panicked, and painfully thin. It sounded like metal scraping against glass. She lunged forward, desperately grabbing a fistful of the expensive fabric on Mason's tailored jacket. "Do not listen to a word she says. Mason!" My mother babbled, her eyes darting wildly around the room, trying to perform damage control for the wealthy guests who were now staring. "Alice is mentally unstable. She has episodes. She just sweeps up trash down at the commercial boat docks. She reads military garbage on the internet and hallucinates that she's important. Please just ignore her." Annie immediately backed her up. She covered her face with her hands, forcing a loud theatrical sob. She was desperately trying to play the innocent, beautiful princess whose special engagement party was being ruined by her crazy, jealous older sister. They were so blind, so deeply buried under their own toxic delusions that they could not see the executioner standing right in front of them. They were frantically throwing handfuls of cheap mud, hoping it would cover up a solid block of forged steel. It did not work. Mason violently jerked his arm back. He physically shoved my mother's clawing hand off his expensive jacket. It was a harsh, dismissive movement, a blunt physical rejection. He did not look at my mother. He did not look at Annie, who was still faking her pathetic tears. His eyes never left my face. The arrogant, untouchable Navy SEAL persona was completely dead. The color had drained from his cheeks. His chest was rising and falling in short, uneven bursts. He was breathing like a man who just realized he had been walking barefoot through a live minefield. "The incident commander," Mason said. His voice dropped to a rough, gravelly whisper. The heavy arrogance was gone, replaced entirely by the distinct, heavy tone of a soldier standing in the presence of a living legend. He took a slow, agonizing step closer to me, completely ignoring the nervous murmurs of the civilian businessmen around him. "If you are actually the person who pulled off that hard bank, if you actually bypassed that fault line in a Category 12 cell..." Mason swallowed hard. The crystal champagne flute in his right hand began to vibrate, a distinct, uncontrollable tremor. "Answer me right now," he demanded, his voice thick with a sudden, suffocating panic. "Are you Lieutenant Commander Alice Jones, the primary operational commander of the search and rescue sector out of Detroit?" The air in the Ashley River mansion turned to solid ice. My mother stopped babbling. Her jaw actually dropped open. Annie lowered her hands from her face, her fake tears instantly drying up. The color completely drained from her heavily contoured cheeks as she stared at the man she intended to marry. The man who was currently looking at her, trashy older sister, with absolute, terrifying reverence. I did not raise my voice. I did not scream to the room that I was right and they were wrong. I did not waste my breath trying to explain my worth to a family that had spent 3 decades trying to bury it. I stood perfectly still. I locked eyes with the Navy SEAL. I gave him a single, slow nod. Yes, I said. My voice was a flat, heavy strike against an anvil. Every syllable was a nail driven deep into the coffin of my family's lies. Officer call sign 884, Bravo. The confirmation hung in the cold air. Mason physically staggered backward. He dragged his left hand down the side of his dress slacks, rubbing the fabric aggressively, unconsciously, trying to grind reality back into his brain. His fingers went completely numb. The heavy, expensive crystal champagne flute slipped out of his shaking hand. It dropped through the dead silent air. Smash! The glass exploded against the hard marble floor. Brilliant, jagged shards of crystal sprayed across the expensive Persian rug. Mason did not flinch. He did not look down at the mess he just made. He kept his wide, shocked eyes glued to my scarred hands. Almighty God! Mason breathed out his voice, shaking with absolute horror. You are the Blizzard hero. What happened next completely shredded the fake, perfect play my family had been putting on for decades. Mason snapped out of his shock. His military training overrode the civilian atmosphere. He violently slammed his 2 leather heels together. Crack! The sound of his shoes hitting the marble was like a gunshot. His spine locked tight, straightening into a rigid, perfect board. He pulled his shoulders back. His right arm snapped up in a sharp, blindingly fast arc. His flat palm stopped exactly at the edge of his right eyebrow. A military salute. Sharp, standard. The absolute highest form of respect in the United States Armed Forces. It did not stop with him. 3 men standing at the edge of the circle, Mason's groomsmen, all active-duty Navy SEALs dressed in civilian suits, instantly recognized the protocol. They did not hesitate. Without exchanging a single word, they slammed their heels together. Crack, crack, crack. They stood at absolute rigid attention, throwing up sharp salutes to the woman in the cheap gray dress. It was a massive, undeniable physical submission to actual proven power. My Aunt Helen took a step back, her mouth hanging open. The cruel laughter from my relatives evaporated, sucked out of the room through the air vents. Lieutenant Commander Jones, Mason said. His voice echoed across the massive room. He did not hide the deep, crushing shame in his tone. Your heavy weather rescue op during that hurricane cell was immediately classified as required case study material for operators back at Coronado Base. The navigation choice you made, your absolute grit under fire, it is already a legend. Mason slowly lowered his hand. He looked past me, his eyes landing directly on Annie. I cannot believe this, he said, his voice dropping an octave thick with pure disgust. The Blizzard hero we were literally just talking about is your older sister. Annie physically recoiled. She took a panicked step backward. The stiletto heel of her expensive designer shoe caught the thick edge of the Persian rug. She stumbled, her arms windmilling violently to catch her balance. She did not fall, but the perfect, untouchable princess image was completely shattered. She grabbed the back of a heavy wooden chair, her knuckles turning white. Black mascara leaked out of the corner of her eye, dragging an ugly, dirty streak down her heavily contoured cheek. The fake golden world she built using my hazard pay just detonated in her face. Right then, a figure stepped out from the shadows near the stone pillar. Admiral Vance. He moved with the slow, deliberate pace of an apex predator. He did not ask people to move. He just walked, and the wealthy civilian crowd parted for him like cheap curtains. He stopped right in front of me. He did not salute. He extended his right hand. I gripped it. The handshake was firm, heavy, the calloused grip of an old sailor who had spent decades on the water. It is an absolute honor to finally meet you in person, Commander, Admiral Vance said. His voice was a deep, rumbling baritone that carried massive weight. Your iron nerve pulled 27 men out of an icy grave. Vance let go of my hand. He slowly turned his head. His cold, steel-colored eyes swept across the cluster of my terrified relatives. He looked at my mother. He looked at Aunt Helen. He looked at them the same way a man looks at dirt stuck to the bottom of his boot. The people standing in this room, Vance said, his voice dripping with venomous contempt, have absolutely no idea who they are breathing the same air as. The silence in the room was absolute. Nobody coughed. Nobody shifted their weight. The silence of the elite crowd was the loudest, most humiliating confirmation of their own ignorance. Mason took 2 steps toward Annie. He looked down at her. He did not offer his hand to help her stand up straight. "You told me she was a parasite," Mason said. His voice was low, but it carried across the dead room. "You told me she was a pathetic freeloader who could not hold down a real job. You hid a decorated military officer in the corner of a room because she did not wear a designer label." Annie started shaking. "Mason, baby, please. She is crazy, she—" "Shut up," he snapped. My mother panicked. Her entire social climbing operation was burning down in real time. She rushed toward me, her hands shaking. She reached out, trying to grab the sleeve of my gray dress. She wanted to hug me. She wanted to suddenly play the role of the proud, supportive mother in front of the admiral. I saw her hands coming. I took one smooth, tactical step backward. I did not let her touch me. I looked at her face. I did not feel anger. I did not feel the desperate, burning need for her approval that had choked me since childhood. I felt nothing. It was just a cold, empty void. I did not say a word to her. I turned my back on my mother. I turned my back on Annie. I gave Admiral Vance one sharp, respectful nod. I reached down and grabbed the heavy nylon handle of my black tactical bag. The rubber wheels ground against the marble floor. I walked straight down the center aisle of the ballroom. The wealthy crowd split wide open to let me through. Not a single person dared to breathe, let alone block my path. I pushed the heavy oak doors open and stepped out into the dark, suffocating heat of the Charleston night. The First War was over. The family lie was dead. But as I threw my bag into the trunk of my rental car, the heavy steel USB drive pressed cold against my chest. I had to drive 1,000 miles north, into the mouth of the real enemy. 0500 hours. The heavy glass door of the Judge Advocate General headquarters in Detroit swung open. The air inside the military briefing room was sterile. Cold. It smelled like floor wax and ozone from the heavy electronics. I walked in. Over 1,000 miles of driving straight through the night on Interstate 26. I did not stop to sleep. I did not stop for coffee. My heavy tactical boots were coated in a fine layer of gray highway dust. But my Navy working uniform was pressed, crisp. My collar devices caught the harsh white glare of the fluorescent lights overhead. I stood at attention at the end of a long aluminum table. 3 general officers and 2 senior criminal investigators sat on the opposite side. They looked tired, irritated. To my left stood the junior lieutenant, the senator's son. He was sweating. Heavy beads of moisture collected on his forehead, catching the harsh overhead light. He kept shifting his weight from one foot to the other. His hands twitched nervously at his sides. He had just finished his official sworn statement. It was a pathetic, whining performance. He blamed the entire near-fatal disaster during the Lake Michigan storm entirely on me. He claimed I was reckless, arrogant. He swore on the official record that I ordered a blind suicidal navigation vector just to protect my own ego and look like a hero. He used the exact same tactics Annie used. Play the victim, cry, point the finger at the person doing the actual work. I did not yell. I did not act outraged. I did not weaponize tears to defend my honor. When the lieutenant finally stopped talking, the room fell silent. The lead investigator, a hardened major general, looked at me. "Lieutenant Commander Jones, do you have a response to these official charges?" "I do, sir." I unzipped the front pouch of my tactical backpack. I pulled out my secured laptop and set it flat on the aluminum table. I reached down the collar of my undershirt, grabbed the cold steel dog tag chain, and pulled out the reinforced thumb drive. I jammed the metal drive into the port. Click. I hit the projection key. The massive smart screen mounted on the wall behind the generals instantly woke up. A geographic satellite radar map illuminated the room. It was not a written statement. It was not a personal opinion. It was hard, undeniable mathematical reality. "This is the real-time sonar tracking from 0300 hours," I said. My voice was completely flat, cold, stripped of all emotion. I tapped a key and a massive red mass began moving across the digital grid. This is a submerged solid ice sheet. It is moving at exactly 12 knots. It is cutting directly across navigation vector 315. I turned my head slowly. I looked directly at the sweating lieutenant. If I had followed the lieutenant's urgent recommendation to bank the cutter to 315, the ship would have sustained a catastrophic hull breach in less than 4 seconds. We would have sunk. The lieutenant swallowed hard. His face turned the color of wet cement. That radar data could be corrupted. It was a Category 12 storm. Systems fail. He was scrambling, digging his grave deeper. I did not argue with him. I hit the spacebar. The room was instantly flooded with sound. The primary cockpit voice radio recording from the cutter. The audio was terrifying. The deafening, violent roar of 30-foot waves smashing against the steel hull. The screaming of the wind. And then cutting through the chaos, a voice. Turn the ship. Turn it to 315. The radar is clear on 315. Do it now, or we are all going to die. It was the lieutenant. His voice was pitched high, breaking with absolute uncontrolled terror. He was sobbing into the comms. He was totally broken. 2 seconds later, a second voice cut through the static on the recording. Negative. It was my voice. Low, heavy, completely unaffected by the screaming wind. Veto on vector 315. Hard bank to 298 immediately. Hold the wheel steady. I am bringing you boys home. I hit the spacebar again. The audio cut out. The sterile silence slammed back into the briefing room. I looked at the lieutenant. His protective shield of political connections, fake confidence, and nepotism just shattered into a million jagged pieces on the floor. His knees actually buckled. He grabbed the edge of the aluminum table to stop himself from physically collapsing. The Major General sitting in the center chair did not ask any follow-up questions. He did not ask for a recess to review the data. He closed the heavy manila folder sitting in front of him. Smack. All charges against Lieutenant Commander Jones are hereby dismissed with prejudice, the general announced. His voice left zero room for debate. He turned his cold eyes toward the sweating, trembling kid holding onto the table. Lieutenant, you are relieved of your duties effective immediately. Surrender your sidearm and your identification. You are being remanded to military custody pending a general court-martial for falsifying official records and conduct unbecoming an officer. 2 heavy-set military police officers stepped out of the shadows near the door. They flanked the kid. They stripped the rank insignia right off his collar. The Major General stood up. The other officers followed suit. He looked at me. The irritation was completely gone from his eyes. It was replaced by a deep, burning respect. We know exactly what kind of steel you are forged from, Commander, the general said quietly. The United States Navy owes you a debt. I did not smile. I did not celebrate. I snapped my heels together. I threw a crisp, perfect salute. I packed my laptop, grabbed my bag, and walked out of the briefing room. I pushed the heavy glass doors of the headquarters open. I stepped outside. The cold, crisp morning air filled my lungs. The sun was just breaking over the horizon, casting a blinding golden light across the concrete base. The rays caught the silver rank insignia pinned to my collar, making it burn bright against the dark fabric. I looked at my phone. 1 unread message. 1 week passed. I drove my beat-up truck up the cracked concrete driveway of my childhood home. The heavy tires crunched over dead leaves and broken gravel. The rusted hinges of the front screen door screamed in high-pitched protest when I pulled it open. The house smelled exactly like it did 20 years ago. Stale cigarette smoke, damp wooden floorboards, and cheap lemon pine cleaner. It was a thick, suffocating smell. I walked into the cramped kitchen. My mother stood at the faded Formica counter. She held a dull kitchen knife violently chopping celery on a scratched plastic board. She heard the heavy rhythmic tread of my tactical boots on the peeling linoleum floor. The knife stopped dead. She turned around. For the first time in my entire adult life, she actually looked at me. She did not sneer. She did not drag her critical eyes over my clothes searching for cheap brands or flaws to mock. She looked terrified. She looked exactly like a desperate gambler who just realized she bet her entire life savings on a dead horse. Her hands started shaking. She dropped the knife into the stained aluminum sink. It made a loud, hollow metallic clatter. Alice, she stammered. Her voice was wet, weak. The arrogant, untouchable matriarch from the Charleston ballroom was completely gone. I am so sorry. I just wanted to protect your sister. You are so strong. You always survived. You have your medals, your rank, and your career. Annie has nothing but her looks. I was just so terrified she would completely break if she had to stand in your massive shadow. It was the ultimate selfish confession. She did not apologize for breaking my bones. She did not apologize for stealing my hazard pay to fund fake parties. She apologized because she got caught using me as a human shield, and now her shield was gone. I stood there. I did not drop my bag. I did not take a single step forward to bridge the physical gap between us. I looked at her face, tracing the deep, ugly lines of bitterness etched heavily around her mouth. I searched my own chest for a reaction. I did not feel a single drop of anger. Anger requires passion. Anger requires a beating heart and a desperate desire to fix things. I looked at the woman who gave birth to me, and I felt absolutely nothing. Just a vast, cold, empty void. I am not angry at you, Mother, I said. My voice was completely flat. It bounced off the peeling yellow wallpaper of the kitchen. But starting today, I am done. I will never, not for one single second, shrink myself down to fit into the pathetic, rotting box you built for this family. I will never make myself small, just so you can pretend your lies are real. She choked out a loud sob. She took a step toward me, reaching out her trembling arms. She wanted a hug. She wanted absolution. She wanted me to pat her on the back and tell her it was okay to be a monster. I took one hard, tactical step backward. I did not give her the satisfaction. Goodbye, I said. I turned around. I walked out the door and let the rusted screen slam shut behind me. 6 months later. The sun broke over the dark, violent horizon of Lake Michigan. The water was pitch black, churning heavily against the massive concrete breakwater. The freezing morning wind whipped off the lake, biting hard at my exposed skin. I did not shiver. I stood planted firmly on the edge of the pier. I wore my navy dress blues. The heavy, dark wool fabric cut a perfect, sharp silhouette against the bleeding dawn sky. The gold brass buttons gleamed. The rows of service ribbons pinned perfectly over my left breast pocket caught the early morning light. The metal was heavy against my chest. It was the weight of real honor. Today was Annie's wedding day. It was not the massive, expensive, high society gala she originally planned. The public scandal in Charleston burned that fantasy straight to the ground. Mason's wealthy family pulled their funding. The Navy SEAL community turned their backs on him for his stolen valor act. Today, Annie was getting married in a cheap rented community hall with 50 pity guests. My civilian phone vibrated in the deep pocket of my trousers. I pulled it out. The screen lit up in the dim dawn light. One new text message. The sender was Annie. Thank you for not giving up on me completely. I know you will not come today. But I am sorry for everything. I stared at the glowing black text on the bright screen. The power dynamic was completely dead and buried. The parasite was finally begging the host for scraps of validation. The corner of my mouth twitched. A slow, cold smirk formed on my face. I did not type a response. I did not offer her forgiveness. I pressed my calloused thumb against the glass screen. I swiped left. I hit the red delete button. The message vanished into the digital void forever. I slid the dark phone back into my pocket. The heavy, freezing wind roared across the open water, whipping stray strands of my hair across my face. I tasted the fresh salt and the raw, violent energy of the deep lake. I was completely free. I was standing exactly where I belonged, a monster forged in cold water and heavy steel. I looked out at the endless dark horizon. Absolute peace does not come from a fake apology. Absolute peace comes when you become so undeniably powerful, so fiercely proud of your own scars, that you no longer need the approval of the people who tried to destroy you. Sometimes the absolute greatest revenge is not destroying the people who hurt you. It is showing them that you are so completely free, so entirely brilliant, that you no longer need them to exist. If you agree with me, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share the exact moment you finally found the courage to cut the toxic, dead weight out of your own life.